Great. We are live. Maybe if you're not speaking, you just mute your mic. For now, then unmute when I pose a question to you. Uh, Welcome to this live event from Ola. Today, our panelist is Rachel Moenda, Alicia Kanagolicha, your host. We're going to discuss Oman's of Oromia reports that that just came out 2 weeks ago. It's a report of various human rights violations that happened in Ethiopia throughout of 2022. So generally, we are going to have general analysis of these reports from the national, perspective, from national law perspective or the constitutional law, and then we'll come in from international law perspective. Welcome, be our audience as you have been always being our audience, and we also encourage you to read our reports. Make sure you have been reading these reports, and then so that we can have much public awareness on the reports. Okay, let's just begin. Maybe introduce yourself. Let me start with Rachel. Thank you.
Good evening, good afternoon, good morning from wherever you're watching. My name is Rachel Mwendwa. I am a law student based in Nairobi, Kenya. However, I will soon be an attorney, and I'm so excited to be here so we can talk about very important issues that are affecting
Good. My name is Kana Golicha. I'm a Kenya lawyer, human rights activist, postgraduate law student, and definitely I'm also education coordinator at Ola. I do part of advocacy. Yeah, thank you. Let's go to.
Great. Hi, everyone. My name is Alyssa Oravec, and I manage the advocacy department at OLA. I am a lawyer by training with a focus on human rights law. And I helped to compile this report that we did this year with the help of our staff who do all the on-the-ground work of actually gathering the information throughout the year. So I'll be happy to talk about that process if you want, Kana, or whatever else. Happy to be here.
Pleasure's mine. Thank you. So let me start with you, Alisa. As Rachel's a bit maybe having some network issues there. She's there back. Let me give us what's Humans of Oromia, a little background on the report. Thank you.
Yeah, so the Humans of Oromia report series is an ongoing report series that OLA produces on roughly a weekly basis. The idea of these reports is to give the human perspective on the kinds of rights violations that Oromo civilians experience. So each report focuses on a single individual or the family who has experienced rights violations, ranging from things like violations of the right to life to torture and inhuman treatment, and really focuses on showing the real human side of these abuses. Because a lot of times what we see is generic reports, talking about how a certain number of people have died, this is a common practice, but it's really these kinds of things that really sort of show that these are like real people and individuals who are experiencing these things. So these reports seek to do that. They're compiled mainly by our staff, who do an excellent job reaching out to the victims and their families, hearing about their stories of rights violations, and at times we do use them from media reports to do some of these stories. But again, it needs to be something that's really focused on an individual who's experienced rights violations.
Great. You're done with that?
Yeah, is there anything else you'd like me to go into about it? Happy to do. Yeah, so these reports cover a range of human rights violations, such as the right to life, arbitrary arrests and detentions, forced displacement and destruction of property, torture and inhuman treatment, and denial of medical treatment to prisoners. A lot of times these aren't the only human rights violations the victims experienced, but they are the major ones we're highlighting for this report. And, basically these violations happen to these individuals, serve to paint a picture of the kind of pattern of violations that Oromo civilians throughout Oromia are experiencing.
Thank you for that. Okay, let's now go to inside this report. Like in this report, we have documented various human rights violations, from right to life, arbitrary detention and for arrest, forced displacement, destruction of civilian properties, torture and human treatment, and denial of medical treatment for those who are arrested. So literally, this report contained these various human rights violations, and at the end contained the summaries and recommendations from all. Okay, let me pose this question to Rachel. In the report, we have seen right to life violations. So maybe highlight us on, one case and what the national laws or the Ethiopian constitution or general law says, and also what the international laws say on human rights violation. Thank you. I think you are mute. You are mute. Unmute yourself.
Yeah, we can't hear you right now, Rachel.
Is your mic on?
Oh.
No, no, your mic is like mute. Unmute your mic. Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
Oh, yes.
Yes.
Oh,
Yes.
sorry. Sorry about that. I have no idea what the problem could be. Um, the right to life is a fundamental human right that has been enshrined in several international human rights instruments, such as the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, and the International Covenant on Economic and Social Cultural Rights. And states have an obligation to ensure that they promote the right to life and do not cause any harm to human life, whether it might be physically or even to their homes. Another key international instrument that is important in relation to the right to life is the
We lost you again, Rachel. I think your mic. Okay, just pause there, Rachel. I think your mic a bit just pause there. Alisa, can you maybe pick up from where she left and then highlight us in the report few examples of this case?
Yeah, so like Rachel was saying, the right to life is fundamental. It's protected in numerous human rights treaties. It's also protected in the Ethiopian constitution itself. And you can see a variety of ways that the right to life theoretically could be violated. For instance, the state has a duty to protect and safeguard the lives of its civilians. So that would include cases where state agents violated the right to life through things like extrajudicial executions, which are killings of civilians deliberately by a state agent outside of the bounds of the law, or things such as, for instance, if an armed group committed an attack on civilians, the state has a duty to protect civilians as well there. So they would have the duty to, for instance, prevent these attacks, investigate them, and respond to them, ensuring that perpetrators are brought to justice. So those are the main kinds of ways that the international law and the right to life really intersects with this report. And then a highlight from our case, one of the case studies that we did this past year was the case of, and I may apologize in advance if I butcher any of the pronunciations of these names. I only ever see them written and don't hear them said, so my apologies. Janet Tabiri and Getachew Kisi. So they were a couple who were expecting a child. They already had 2 children on the way. They went to attend a reception following a wedding of their friends, but Members of Ethiopian National Defense Forces reportedly came to them, drew them out of the party, and shot them in front of the guests there. And apparently, according to the sources consulted for this report, they had received threats previously from members of the regional government who accused them of having relatives who were in the Oromo Liberation Army. So this is a clear violation of the right to life. State agent directly killed civilians and without any legal processes. Yeah. So yeah, that's one shocking example.
Yes.
The report has several.
Thank you, thank you. I think I can add in one case where an individual by the name Mumo Bushra from West Hararghe was, in prison after Chalun Desa's death. He was a shopkeeper and a member of Oromo Federalist Congress. In this our report of 2022, this individual was, taken from his shop, imprisoned in Comunicado, and then later he was taken out of prison and assassinated and killed. This sad story, there is also a casing example. If you read this report of Months of Oromia that was documented by Ola throughout 2022, there's this individual by the name Pastor Dure Bayisa, who was also from I think, if I pronounce him well, he was from the western side of Oromia. Just because the government suspected that he's a member of Ole or spy for that, he was imprisoned, later then killed. And I think that generally what we have documented is many people who are killed, not by state agent, not following due process of the law. They are not taken to court first. And then, for example, like the Ethiopian constitution says that if someone is arrested, he should be taken to court in 48 hours. These people are not taken to court, they are in prison, then later taken out of prison, and then they are killed. These are one of the examples. We invite the members of the public to read this report. Yeah. Also, please mute your mic, please. Thank you. So I think right to life, those are few analysis we can do on that. Let's now go to arbitrary detention and arrest that's contained in our report throughout 2022. Maybe Lisa, tell us about arbitrary detention and what's the element in there.
Okay, yeah. So this is another right that's protected under international human rights law, specifically under the right to liberty that people have. And this is contained in, again, numerous human rights treaties, including the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. Basically, arbitrary arrests and detentions are considered to be arrests and detentions that are not in accordance with the procedures established by law. So they can be a range of various things that can count as an arbitrary arrest and detention. So for instance, someone who's arrested without cause or without charges, that would be an arbitrary arrest, arbitrary detention, for example. For instance, if someone was ordered released by a judge or a court and the officers of the prison or whoever else refused to release them, that would be an arbitrary detention, for just two brief examples of that. And again, much like the right to life, many of these, and I think most of the rights that are theoretically protected under international law are also contained in the Ethiopian constitution. Yeah, and then I think the other thing that comes along with arbitrary arrest and detention, often in Ethiopian case, what we're seeing is further violations of other rights of civilians, such as their rights to due process of law and the right to a fair trial in various ways. Yeah.
Thank you. And I see in the Allah's report 2022, we have seen there mass arbitrary detention throughout Oromia in all regions, south, western, and we have documented, various arbitrary detention violation against civilians, and mostly in the name of, either your parent or your kid joined the Ola, the OLA, I think, and then you are suspected, and then you are held incommunicado. Either again, you have seen in Amnesty International reports like the 2021 when someone was speaking to someone on the phone, or you have seen women. We have documented women in 2021 in East Guji where they were detained because their children or the husband have joined the online, and that they have been, fighting against the government, and that has been rampant in 2022. I think in our report, and if you want to see, read and get a lot of, this report and what's happening in Oromia, please read our reports. Let us now go to Rachel. Are you
Actually,
back?
oh, sorry.
Lisa, you want to add something?
Yeah, I was just going to add one point. So I think, Kana, you're absolutely right in saying many of the people featured in this report were people who were suspected of somehow being connected to the OLA. Another trend we documented during the year of 2022 was journalists being arrested and arbitrarily detained, usually under the state of emergency that was adopted in November of 2021 and detained for long periods of time without trial. So that's just one more aspect that we saw. Sorry about that.
Thank you. I'm just inquiring. Rachel, are you back?
Yes, I'm back. However, I think my camera was very blurry, so I don't know if you were able to see me. I'm really sorry about that, but we shall continue. The show must go on.
No problem, no problem. Thank you. So maybe if let me tell us about arbitrary detention and give us an example in this case what was documented.
Of arbitrary detention. Um, Thank you. Both of you have already more or less highlighted. I would uh, draw your attention to a case study in the report about the detention of a woman who was devoted to helping others. Her name is Chaltu Asfu Duguma, and she's 29 years old. And she was detained, and she was detained by 5 uniformed officers, and she was placed under arrest, and she did not have any legal representation, or she was not even informed of the reason for her detention. And that is something that is very problematic and um, is in fact against the law. Yes, so that's an example.
Thank you, thank you. Maybe Alisa, you give us an example in the case, one example, and we ramp up on that.
All right, sure. Yeah, so I think one other one that I maybe touched on a bit, my last one was the detention of journalists. This isn't the only one we covered in our report series, but Amir Aman Kiara was a 30-year-old Associated Press journalist. He was detained since he had been detained in November 28, 2021. He was arrested by Ethiopian security forces who were very curious about some of the work that he did on reporting and basically thought he had committed a crime along those lines. It was an arbitrary arrest and detention, but because he was arrested under Ethiopia's state of emergency, which was again enacted in November of 2021, they were allowed to hold him without bringing him before a court of law until the time when that state of emergency ended. So he was held for over 100 days until April 2022, where he was ordered released by a judge. So, this is just a kind of highlight of just how flagrant the kinds of abuses that can be seen and how poor the detention conditions are for people who have been detained, being detained for long periods of time without a trial. Yeah.
Great, thank you, thank you. Again, we have seen in our various months of Oromia report where judicial officers were also harassed. Mostly, sometimes they also ran for their life by mostly the state agent for, just standing up to the rule of law and accountability. And we have documented that. Thank you for that. I think now let us go to forced displacement is another violation that have been there. Maybe Rachel tell us about forced displacement, and then we wrap up giving an examples of in our reports where we have documented that.
Thank you, Kana. Forced displacement is basically the removal of people as well as the property from their place of residence. And this is a violation of human rights. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights, particularly Article 17, provides that everyone has the right to own property alone as well as in association with others. Therefore, those who are forcefully displaced lose all of their property and also their home or a place that they have called home for such a long time. And sometimes forceful displacement might can lead to um, people actually settling in other countries and in other countries as refugees, or perhaps even in their country, and then they become internally displaced persons, as is the case in Oromia at the moment, and that the government has a duty to ensure that people, that humans are not arbitrarily displaced from their homes and places of residence.
Thank you, thank you. Any, let's say you want to add anything on that?
Yeah, I think she did a really good job summing up the basics of law for that. Do you want me just to skip into some of the case studies?
Yes, maybe
Yeah,
you are lighting
yeah.
for case
Rachel, you
studies.
did a great job with that one. So we'll leave it there. Yeah, so I think, we saw several cases of this throughout the year and that we report on the Humans of Oromia series. But, what we have seen is reports of government forces, including in the RC zone, destroying homes, attacking civilians and communities where the OLA operates and accusing them of somehow supporting the OLA. So one example was a man named Nagasa Hulufe, who was a teacher and whose home was one of 250 burned down by members of Oromia Special Forces, according to our sources. And so they were forced to watch as their home was burned down. They weren't sure where to go. They were forced to flee their homes, so leaving them very vulnerable to potentially becoming internally displaced, along with having forceful destruction of their property.
Great, and I think forced displacement always happen where there is active hostility going on, mostly in the Western Oromia, where people are being displaced from their homes. Various reports from the source on the ground, most of militias are blamed, Oromia Special Forces are blamed, Fandos are blamed on that. So such displacements, I think, make people, when their properties are, displaced, their poverty level increase within that areas, and various human rights violations, right to shelter, right to food, all those are violated in socio-economic right in there. Yeah. Okay, let's now go to destruction of property we have seen because of the conflict that happened in Oromia that has been going on for the last 3 or even 4 years. A lot of destruction of property happened, and we have documented, the organization or able to document in various parts of Oromia where destruction of property happened. Maybe Alisa, now you take the lead on destruction of the property definition for audience, and we might go to Rachel for the example. Thank you.
Yeah, so destruction of property is pretty interrelated with internal displacement at times. Basically, these are cases where you've seen generally government operatives, although others burning down homes of civilians. And so the right to property is something that's protecting in multiple human rights treaties. Again, for instance, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights that says that no one shall be arbitrarily deprived of his property. So in cases like the one I just highlighted, where government forces burned down a home or 250 homes of people they said had supported the OLA, that would be a arbitrary deprivation of property and the destruction of property being a human rights violation. So yeah, our report highlighted a few cases of that. There's also one case that we studied where Amhara militias reportedly destroyed properties and forced civilians to flee their homes as well. I think most of the other ones focus on acts by state agents specifically.
Great. Even before we go to Rachel, I say in the last 4 or 5 days, there have been conflict that's going on in Waldo, and we have been documenting and closely following that, where destruction of property keep happening, and we have seen civilian house burnt to ashes. Literally, when women's bodies are dignity have been removed, and people are burning the bodies of human life. You've seen the magnitude that happened in district called, in Waldo, that's called Uguma. I think the first name, I can't remember that, but you have seen multi-million properties have been destroyed, and that throughout. It do happen also in the, southern Oromia, in Guji, where it's people, in recollection, whenever the government claim that rebels attack them, they come back and revenge, burn the civilian houses and their properties. Sometimes even livestock are burnt alive in the name of punishing. And our ground, our source from the ground always tell us how, why did people pass through you and attack us, and then the government or the other special militias, local militias that support pro-government, burn this property to ashes, and this again, like I say, reduce people to poverty. And you have seen right now in all of Africa, even in Oromia, people are literally dying of hunger, drought, famine are there. Now, when you know burn their properties and their livelihood is destroyed, and poverty level keep increasing. And people, I think, displacement that have been documented by UN this year, displacement in Ethiopia is, I think, the second largest in the whole world, if I'm not wrong. So, Rachel, let's go to examples. Maybe you can highlight for us one example in the report. Thank you.
Thank you. So far, we have extensively studied the issue of destruction of property, and one illustration that comes to mind is the case of Mr. Lita Lebeta, whose home was destroyed by the Ethiopian National Defense Forces (ENDF) in June on the 5th of June 2022. His house was burnt as well as destruction of all of his property, including 30 quintals of grain that he had stored, leaving him, his children, his neighbors, and his community without food. And there was no excuse for this, and he was just an innocent person. Thank you.
Good. I think we have highlighted the destruction of property in the reports. If you want to read our audience, we encourage you go to www.ola.org and type on exclusive reports. Humans of Oromia are always, published there. You can find our report in all social media, page, Twitter at Ola Oromo, Facebook, Oromo Ola, Oromo Legacy and Advocacy Association. Our reports are published there, and you can follow us in our weekly updates. Also, let us go to another human rights violation that is documented several in our reports. That is torture and inhuman treatment of individuals in Oromia throughout 2022. Even before I pose any question to my panelists, I think that violation has been rampant in Ethiopia throughout 2022. And I think it's one of derogatory, non-derogatory rights, human rights, torture and inhuman treatment is, you cannot, that doesn't have any limitation, justification for that, and you cannot limit such rights. It's I think, literally, someone is just by being human being, you cannot torture and mistreat them. I think let us now go to with Elisa and maybe definition and yeah, give us the background in the report. Thank you.
Yeah, so I think Kane set that up really well. But basically, international human rights law and again, the Ethiopian constitution have a general prohibition on torture and inhumane treatment. And basically, these are actions taken by a state agent or public official or someone else acting in an official capacity that causes, in the case of torture, severe pain or suffering intentionally inflicted upon another person for a variety of reasons, including coercing them, discriminating against them for a variety of various means. But basically, what's really required under international law is for these to be actions intended to inflict pain and done by a state agent. So, and a lot of times in the cases that we've seen in our Humans of Oromia reports, these kinds of treatments are conducted against prisoners once they've been detained. There are also some cases where people have been just detained briefly and subjected to torture and inhuman treatment.
Thank you, thank you. I think now let's go my fellow friend and Rachel. I like us maybe an example in a report on that. Thank you.
Oh, okay. Thank you. I just wanted to highlight the fact that torture in Ethiopia does not discriminate against anyone. I mean, that anyone can be a victim of torture. In our report, we highlighted an incident of a 5-year-old child being tortured by the Ethiopian National Defense Forces. I repeat, a 5-year-old girl, Biftu Jamal Bipsa. She was tortured while she was traveling to school in the West Guji zone in Oromia, and the reason for her torture was because her father was a fighter for the Oromo Liberation Army, and that she was repeatedly beaten and mistreated as well as arrested. And it is reported that the Ethiopian National Defense Forces said that they can do anything to her until her father comes back, and her father in this case is actually a fighter for the Oromo Liberation Army, Ola. Yes.
Thank you, thank you. Any example you want to add, Alice, on that?
Yeah, I'll just add one more. So there's a man named Mama Kadiro, who is a 40-year-old farmer and father of three. He was tortured by members of the Oromia Special Police Force, according to our sources, for being outside in the West Artsy Zone out after curfew. So he was detained by police once he was out past curfew. They claimed that he was a member of the OLA, and they took him to police camp where he experienced harsh torture and interrogation all night long, where they were attempting to force him to confess that he was a member of the OLA. Unfortunately, Mama Kadiro was brought to a health station the next day, but he later passed away from his injuries. So in addition to being a violation of, the prohibition on torture, it's also a violation of his right to life as well.
Great. So far we are doing so good, and I think thank you guys for your sharp in giving the analysis in the law. Okay, let's go to another human rights violation we documented throughout 2022. That is denial of medical treatment to prisoners who have been arrested or detained. Maybe how is denial of medical treatment a human rights violation? Maybe anyone can go first. Who want to go first?
I'm happy to do so.
Yeah.
So yeah, it has its basis under a couple of different things, kind of. So the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights specifically sets out that people have the right to the highest attainable standard of physical and mental health. Also, under various other international human rights, such as the right to liberty and the right to people to be treated with dignity, prisoners have that right as well. It's been pretty explicitly well recognized under international law that prisoners have the right of access to medical treatment. One compilation of these kinds of statements that's been put together is the UN Standard Minimum Rules for the Treatment of Prisoners. And they set out pretty explicitly that states have a responsibility to provide healthcare for its prisoners to the same standards as those are available to the community. So that would be necessary health checks, emergency treatments, and the like.
Great. I think this time around I will give an example on case study just to break that monotony. So in this enormous of Oromia, I think the example, one of the example is a permanent, opposition guy or left guy Gadaga Bisa, who has been in jail over a long period of time. He has been ill, and then he requested for medical assistance. Prisoners should be taken when they are prisoner under custody of the government or their institution. They should be taken to for medical attention, and literally, he has been denied several times, and we always think that the situation is deteriorating many times. And there are many such cases right now of recently, since the cessation of hostility in the northern Ethiopia, many young people are being detained. And I think even in 2023, we'll keep getting such people being denied medical attention. If even some people are even taken out of prison and killed, what about the denying of the medical, attention? And I think let us ramp up this by Rachel. Maybe I like for us maybe anything you want to add on this.
Kana, anything I'd like to add in regards to medical denial of medical treatment or generally?
On denial to medical treatment.
Okay. Well, I would just like to add that it's definitely denial of denying someone access to medical treatment infringes on the human dignity, and that's very important. As Alyssa highlighted, international law provides that everyone has the right to dignity, as well as I think that denying them access to medical care is an infringement of their right to health. And it really does, in fact, affect their physical and mental health because you know that you might actually be dying and you're not being offered treatment. And that is psychologically harmful to the person's psyche.
Guys, to our audience, thank you for being with us patiently. Now we're going to my great panelists, thank you. So we're going to now to summary of the finding and recommendations on, and then to conclusion. In summary, what can you say about this report, Alisa? In summary, yeah.
Yeah, I
Just in
think whenever whenever you take these kinds of reports we get together, we're starting to see a real pattern of violations being experienced and perpetrated against Oromo civilians throughout the Oromia region. So, Oromos are frequently subjected to violent attacks, both by state agents and non-state armed actors, which leads to two major violations we've categorized in the reports: denial of the right to life, and then forced displacement and destruction of property. The other side of the coin that we're seeing is a lot of arbitrary arrests and detentions of Oromo civilians. Oftentimes, this is because of their links to the OLA. Other times, or purported links to the OLA, especially in case of arbitrary arrests and detentions. Other times, it's because of their participation and working with Oromo political groups such as Gada Gavisa, who you highlighted, Kana, or at the times we saw journalists being arrested and detained for the work that they did. And then once detained, they're subjected to a further litany of human rights abuses. So it's really clear based off of this that it's not just isolated incidents of Oromo civilians experiencing rights violations. This is something that's happening on a broad scale and really needs to be addressed, both by the Ethiopian government, who is the primary duty bearer under international law and has the responsibility to protect and safeguard its civilians' rights, and also by the international community, who really has taken a strong interest in the situation in northern Ethiopia. But at the same time, civilians in the south are experiencing violations as well that are not being responded to and protected adequately by the Ethiopian government. So the international community, we see, is really also having to play a role and step up to ensure the protection of civilians' rights by pressuring the Ethiopian government.
Great, thank you. I think you have put it there. Before I add, let me hear from Rachel on summary. What could you say about this? What has caught your attention, in this
Thank you. What Something that has caught my attention, I would say, is the um, denial of access to medical treatment, and I think that the international community needs to um, let our voices be heard and be in charge over this situation, because prisoners are dying at the hands of both state actors and non-state actors, and I believe that this is something that definitely has to change, especially on humanitarian grounds, because this is definitely discrimination of the highest order.
Great. I think in this report, when we published this report, Ola did call this year as the one of the very hard for Oromos because of the various human rights violations, the magnitude of drone attack, arbitrary detention, forced displacement, even the drought that's ranging throughout the year. And I think, in summary, I think these are the major human rights violations are there, and we call people to become voice, keep documenting, send us. Uh, Let us now go to shift to the recommendation. I think when we put out these reports, and these recommendations are there for Ethiopia, other stakeholders like the international communities, other human rights defenders, the non-state actors that are there. So, Alisa, maybe highlight for us the recommendation we put forward in these reports.
Yeah, I'll try to summarize and make that fast because they're a little lengthy. But our major recommendations, I'll go first to the Ethiopian government and then to the international community. So the Ethiopian government, as I mentioned earlier, is the primary rights holder and duty bearer under international law. So one of our major first requests to them is to ensure that their state agents are not violating the rights of civilians through things like extrajudicial executions, arbitrary arrests and detentions, other things of that nature. They also have the duty to promptly and impartially investigate all credible allegations of human rights across the country, ensure that individuals found responsible are brought to justice. We also noted that there is a current UN investigation occurring into the situation into reports of human rights abuses across Ethiopia since November of 2020. So we encourage them to work together with them and allow them full access to the country so that they can conduct such impartial investigations, as well as allow other groups to conduct impartial investigations as well, because we do think, a lot of the trouble with Oromia is that there is so little information that gets out about these abuses. So we really need credible investigations into these kinds of abuses that are highlighted in this report. And finally, we called on them to seek a peaceful means to end the conflict with the OLA in Oromia, like they have recently done with the TPLF in northern Ethiopia. For the international community, a lot of this is the same. I don't know, Kama, do you want to switch to someone else for this part, or do you want me to go? I feel like I might be chatting for a long time. So.
Yeah, you can just rush through it. Yeah,
okay. Okay, great. So for the international community, we're really calling on them to do more to raise awareness and publicly condemn these violations of human rights being perpetrated against Oromos, do what they can through their diplomatic tools at their disposal to pressure the Ethiopian government to fulfill its duty to protect human rights and launch truly impartial investigations, encourage the government to enter into negotiations for a ceasefire agreement with the OLA, consider launching investigations into human rights abuses, and support the work of the UN Commission. And finally, I think end of the day, in order to have lasting peace, we're going to need to have truly inclusive transitional justice mechanisms. So asking them both to call for the establishment of them and to support them as they are developed.
Great. I think I will just emphasize on your reports. I think the current commission that's there. We also call on the government to allow the commission individuals to gain access into Oromia and get those human rights violation, because whenever the civilians are killed, every party blame the others, and we don't know in this case civilians have died. There are a lot of allegations of drone attacks that have killed people in the marketplace, in the churches and mosques. So I think allowing independent investigators in this place and giving them accurate data will do great justice to those people and their families. You have seen recently a head of human bodies cut and then people walk with it in the street. I think those are barbaric acts and we keep condemning that. I think in conclusion, let us go now to the conclusion and your final word on this. Maybe Rachel take ahead on conclusion about this on this report and what you say, and maybe say our last one on this. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Kana. In conclusion, I would like to state that we really need the support of the international community, and to our viewers, we would really appreciate if you could read our report and perhaps even give us feedback or even share anything that you have come across. In general, I would say that this report has really exposed me to a lot of new areas that I was not aware of. I was not aware that in 2022 that prisoners were being denied critical medical care, and I think that is something that the international community should indeed publicly condemn. I've also noticed that women and children are particularly vulnerable in Oromia, particularly on the case studies that we have highlighted, especially in relation to torture and arbitrary detention, and there is indeed a need for action to be done in that regard. Thank you.
Thank you. Maybe Alisa, in 2 minutes, you highlight your conclusion and your final word on this.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think, what this report really serves to do is put a human face on the stories that we hear. Members of the Oromo community, other actors across the globe have some knowledge of the fact that people inside Oromia are experiencing human rights violations. But until they really see that story and hear about the individual, I think a lot of times it's hard for people who don't have that direct connection to really understand what is happening. And while this report really serves as highlighting the cases of individuals, we also must not lose sight of the fact that this is part of a pattern that we're seeing. It's not just one or two people who are experiencing these things. It's happening across Oromia. Oromo civilians are paying and experience the brunt of the consequences of the conflict that's happening in that area. So we really have a duty as an international community to condemn these violations, one, ensure their investigations, but really to press for peace and find ways to adopt transitional justice measures that really both recognize what happened, give an avenue for justice, and can set a path forward for people to come together.
Great, thank you. I think in my final one, 30 second, we keep finding, a lot of hardship documenting human rights violation from there. And I always appreciate those people, human rights defenders, who share with us their reports. And we keep it confidential and we verify and publish it. Please keep sending us various human rights violations in Oromia, in any part of Oromia. Send us, we verify, we document, and we make it where the world should hear what's happening. So 2022 have been described as one of the hardest, or even difficult year for Oromos, and I think 2023 is not going to be different. So please, to all those human rights defenders, keep defending human rights of individuals and keep sending us reports. You have been great audience, you have been our great supporters, and we encourage everyone to read our reports and share with various human rights organizations. To my audience, thank you very much, and to my great panelists, I appreciate you. Until next time, bye bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.